Hello, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith. Have you ever wondered why seemingly small stories in the Bible sometimes seem to contradict itself? Why would one verse call Keturah, Abraham's partner after Sarah, his wife, and another label her as his concubine? Was Keturah truly Abraham's wife, or was she simply considered one of his concubines? And does this difference in terminology have any significance for us today? In this episode of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast, we'll look at the mystery surrounding Keturah's role in Abraham's life. What did her status really mean, and why do the biblical accounts refer to her in such different ways? Get ready to dive deep as we explore these intriguing questions. Let's start by looking at the two main verses that set up this question, and we'll read both from the New Living Translation. Genesis 25:1 says this, Abraham married another wife, whose name was Keturah. However, 1 Chronicles 1:32 refers to her differently. The sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, were Zemran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, if you're wondering why the Bible mentions the sons of Keturah, it's to establish the ancestry of Arabian tribes, and that's an important detail as we trace Abraham's lineage. So, let's set the stage with the problem as defined by the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, where they write this. Genesis 25:1 says Abraham married another wife, whose name was Keturah, while 1 Chronicles 1:32 states the sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine. Was Keturah Abraham's wife, or was she merely one of his concubines? Right. Now, atheists and skeptics frequently point to this as yet another example in what they see as a series of contradictions within the Bible. They argue that inconsistencies like this cast doubt on its divine origin and question its reliability. For them, it's part of a larger case against the Bible's authority and infallibility. But is that really the whole story? To explore this, let's first look now at Genesis 25, 5 through 6 for some more context. Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac, but before he died, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them off to a land in the east away from Isaac. All right, here the term concubines is used, which likely includes Keturah and others. All right, so let's start with a solution from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, where they write this. The contradiction is only apparent, and the problem can be easily solved by closer consideration. First, although in Genesis 25:1, the normal Hebrew word for wife, ishshah, is used, it's also the normal word for woman. It is not necessary to take the word in this case to mean wife, especially in light of verse 6 and the statement in 1 Chronicles 1:32 that Keturah was his concubine. Genesis 25:1 can be read simply as, and Abraham took another woman as his concubine. Second, although 1 Chronicles employs the Hebrew word for concubine, pilegesh, in reference to Keturah, Genesis 25:6 uses the same word when referring to the mothers of all his other sons apart from Isaac. This would obviously include Keturah as one of his concubines. Additionally, Genesis 25:1 begins with the Hebrew word vayosef, which can be translated and adding or and in addition to. Since Genesis 24 verse 67 clearly states that Sarah, Abraham's wife, had died, verse 1 of chapter 25 could not mean that Abraham was adding to his number of wives. It is more reasonable to take this word as indicating that Abraham was adding to his number of concubines by taking another woman, ishshah. Now, the apparent discrepancy between Genesis 25:1, which calls Keturah Abraham's wife, and 1 Chronicles 1:32, which refers to her as his concubine, can be addressed through several explanations. The first explanation would be flexible terminology. In ancient Near East culture, the terms wife and concubine could be used interchangeably. Keturah's role might have been between that of a primary wife, like Sarah, and a slave concubine, like Hagar. This interpretation aligns with the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, and it appears to fit well with Scripture. For example, Genesis 16:3 states, "So Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abraham as a wife." The word Ishshah in Genesis 25:1 can mean either woman or wife, and it may simply indicate that Abraham took another woman without implying she held the full status as a wife. Ultimately, Keturah's designation may reflect the flexible use of terms like wife and concubine in Abraham's time. Her role likely held an intermediate status, neither fully a primary wife like Sarah, nor merely a servant, which helps resolve the seeming discrepancy in Scripture. All right, the second explanation could be a change in status. It's also possible that Keturah began as a concubine and was later elevated to the status of wife, perhaps after Sarah's death. This could explain the differing descriptions. GotQuestions.org, in their article, "Who was Keturah in the Bible?" notes this, and I quote, "There has been some debate as to whether Keturah was Abraham's wife or his concubine, since she is described as each in different places in Scripture. Genesis 25:1 says that Keturah was his wife. 1 Chronicles 1:32 calls her his concubine. Genesis 25:6 also implies that Keturah was a concubine. A concubine was a woman who willingly entered into an exclusive relationship with a man for the purposes of meeting his sexual needs or providing children for him. Hagar was considered a concubine of Abraham's. The woman was often a slave or a single female without male protectors. A concubine did not have equal status as a wife, but, unlike a prostitute, she was provided for and considered the sole property of the man. Because Keturah was in a monogamous relationship with Abraham, she could properly be considered his wife, although she had a lesser rank than Sarah had enjoyed. Okay, Keturah's initial role as a concubine, potentially later promoted to wife status after Sarah's death, could account for these different designations. However, Keturah, even if considered a concubine turned wife, is not accorded the same honor in Scripture, as we see in 1 Peter 3:6. Thus, she may be viewed as a secondary wife, not having the same status as Sarah, a view supported by Genesis 25:6, which refers to Abraham's concubines in the plural. Now, this view suggests that Keturah's role evolved over time, starting as a concubine, later elevated to wife. Her status would still be secondary to Sarah's, explaining why Scripture refers to her differently and reflecting a nuanced view of her position in Abraham's life. And the third explanation is chronological considerations. And this is interesting. Some scholars propose that Abraham's relationship with Keturah may have started before Sarah's death, even though it's only mentioned later in the text. Ancient literature didn't always follow strict chronological order. The Bible Ref website explains it this way. Bible interpreters disagree about when Abraham married Keturah, his other wife. Does the text mention this marriage here because it came after Sarah's death has been traditionally understood? That is possible, but ancient literature was not written in the same chronological sense as modern history. The other more likely possibility is that Abraham married Keturah before Sarah died. Given that Abraham had 6 children with Keturah, it seems more likely that theirs was an ongoing relationship, not one which did not start until Abraham was nearly 140 years old, end quote. Similarly, Ligonier.org's February 1, 2007 devotional titled Exit Abraham comments with this. Having provided us with Abraham's last will and testament in Genesis 24, Moses records Abraham's death in chapter 25. Yet, before he dies, we read of another wife he took named Keturah. Since we later learned that Keturah was the patriarch's concubine or secondary wife, most commentators think he married her while Sarah was still alive, much as he wed Hagar in Genesis 16, end quote. Now, this interpretation proposes that the timeline of Keturah's relationship with Abraham is presented out of order for emphasis rather than strict chronology. If their relationship started earlier, it underscores how ancient narratives prioritize thematic importance, helping us better understand Keturah's place in Abraham's life story. In the end, Keturah's role in Abraham's life shows how terms like wife and concubine could have varied meanings within ancient cultures. Whether she was initially a concubine, later elevated to wife, or had an intermediate role, Keturah's story offers us a fascinating glimpse into the customs of biblical times. And while the Bible acknowledges Keturah's place, it consistently upholds Sarah as the primary wife and mother of the promised heir, Isaac. Understanding the nuances in Keturah's story offers us a glimpse into ancient relationship structures and reminds us that biblical accounts often hold layers of meaning, shaped by culture, context, and purpose. Thanks for joining us in exploring this mystery today. Next week, we'll delve into another puzzling question. How could Abraham father children naturally with Keturah after the miracle birth of Isaac? This will give us more insight into Abraham's family dynamics and life after Sarah. And remember, studying the Bible isn't just about finding answers. It's about asking the right questions. Thanks for listening. As always, we love hearing from our listeners. We now have a Bible Difficulties and Answers Facebook page where you can interact with me and other followers of the show. You may also reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. I'm always glad to hear from our listeners. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend or two as well, and also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.